Olá! Thank you for watching this video series on translation and technology brought to you by the Language Resource Center at the University of Michigan and the Corpus-Driven Terminology and Translation Research Group from the University of Brasília. My name is Elisa Duarte Teixeira, and this is what we are going to go over in this video. So in this video, we are going to talk about translation memories. How do they work? To do that, we are going to start by explaining what is a translation memory. Then we are going to talk about how translation memories work, and then explain how the information is stored and retrieved in their systems. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how to prevent some of the negative impacts of using translation memory in your work. So we have learned in our previous video that CAT tools, or computer-assisted translation tools, are translators' best friends because they are these software packages or suites with tools, applications to help translators better do their jobs. And one of the most important features in a CAT tool is their translation memory, or also called TM. But also there are several other very useful tools in a CAT tool. And one of them that we should not mix up with translation memory is the machine translation. So TM and MT are different things. And we've learned that before. So just keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. And what is, after all, a translation memory? It's a linguistic database that stores segments of the original or the source text and their corresponding translation done by a human translator. So these segments can be anything from a sentence that ends with some kind of punctuation, or a list of things. So each item of the list is one segment. So there's some kind of mark in the text that shows separation from that segment to the next. And sometimes we translators can tell the computer where to make those cuts. So every time you translate one piece of that information from the source text, the translation memory is going to record that in a database to retrieve it in the future as we go through your text translating. So what are some of the benefits of using a translation memory? For one thing, you're going to have a record of your solutions. So things that you've researched sometimes for 1 hour, for days to find a solution, it's all going to be saved in this memory. And not only that, but it's going to be shown to you once you come up with a context that is similar to that one that you just that you've recorded before in your translation memory. So that helps you save time, also save memory for other things or time. Searching that information again, you don't need to do that. And also you can reuse some of the translations that you've done before, providing that the context is similar. So how do these translation memories work? I'll give you a very concrete example. I translate cookbooks for many years now. So let's say that I have a new translation job to translate a cookbook of pastry recipes. And among these recipes, there is this rainbow cake recipe that has this step in the method. Bake until toothpick inserted in the center of the cake comes out clean, 52 to 58 minutes. And I immediately think, I've translated that before. Not only once, but sometimes several times. But if I were to rely only on my memory to find that information, I would never maybe remember in which one of the books that I've translated before that I had that particular context similar to the one that I'm translating. So the translation memory is going to help you remember that by looking for that every new sentence that you have to translate, it's going to be compared to this database to see if there's anything that is exactly the same or very similar to the context that you are working on. So here are three examples that I pulled from my translation memory of cookbooks, where you can see the red text very, very similar to the context that I have to translate right now for this new translation job. So looking at the solutions that I've had before, I can come up with the solution on the bottom of the page based on my previous choices. So how is this data organized inside the translation memory? Once you upload the text in a CAT tool, this text is going to be broken into these segments. So segments can be, again, sentences with a full stop, or you can use commas to separate segments, although it may not work depending on the area that you are. But once the segments are separated in the program, every time you go to the next segment, you put your translation there, and this is going to form a unit with the source text and its equivalent translation. And that's going to be stored in that database. So here's an example here of a translation unit. So now let's have a look at how translation memories work. So when you first start using a translation memory, the translation memory is empty because it's filled by your work as you go through your text. And the same way that you divide your segments, your source text into segments, the translation memory also has the same segmentation because the units are divided using the same principle, except for a few details. For instance, it ignores numbers. Sometimes it ignores words starting with capital letters because they're proper nouns. So that's all something you can tweak to make it work better for you for the kind of text that you usually work with. So every time you go through a text to translate it, the text is going to be shown to you, the source text, and then a space for you to enter the translation is going to be shown either on the side or underneath. And as you do that, the computer is going to search for similar contexts in this database. And if it finds anything that's equal or very similar to what you're translating now, it's going to show you some solutions somewhere in your screen for you to reuse it or not. If you think it's useful, you just insert them and make the changes and commit, creating a new translation unit. If nothing is found, you just have the empty cell to type your translation. And then you can use, for instance, machine translation to help you find the solutions or even the terminology tools to remind you of the translation of some of the terms that are appearing again in your source text. But once you commit that translation, once you hit the enter or go to the next cell, that translation unit is created and it's immediately available for using in the next segment that you're translating. A translation memory is going to be filled as you work step by step. But of course, if you're starting to translate now and a company is sending you material and they have their own translation memory from previous works, they can send that to you and you can use that either as a consulting translation memory or to add more segments to that translation memory. You can also find some translation memories on the internet, and here are some links for you to have a look into. They are not usually very friendly when you first start working with them, but we are going to have a video to talk about that. So let's have a quick look into the mechanics of the translation memory, how it works. There are three kinds of matches. A full match, which is 100% identical. So let's say in recipes, we always, most savory recipes have salt and pepper to taste, or season with salt and pepper. So that's going to repeat over and over and over again. So if you translate it once, you don't need to translate it again, because the translation memory is going to show you and sometimes even complete your cell with that translation. There are also the fuzzy matches, and you can see an example here in this image. You have a sentence that's almost identical, but there's one or two elements or a part of this sentence that is different. In this case here, the name of the person changed, but that doesn't change the rest of the content, so you can recycle that information. Some CAT tools nowadays and translation memory systems are now working with what we call a sub-segment chunk, which means stretches or pieces of language that are smaller than a sentence. And sometimes they are phraseologies or terminology that's longer than 1 or 2 or 3 words that repeat in text, and the computer can identify those. So these are the most helpful kind of identification of similarity, but it's the hardest to use because that stretch of 4 words, it's in the middle of a long sentence, and it's hard for you to identify that inside that long sentence. So again, the full match, even if the computer is telling you this is a full match, you have to check your context, because we have cases of synonym or polysemy, homonyms. So in this example here, if we're talking about emptying a pipe, we can be in the context of smoking or in the context of plumbing. So we have to pay attention to our context. In the fuzzy match, the usual threshold is 75%, but you can work with any kind of percentage that you find appropriate for your subject area, because each area is going to be different. And of course, it depends very much on the kind of translation memory you are using. Usually a translation memory that's very specialized and very large, you can make this number higher. Otherwise, you're going to get so many possible matches that it's going to take you a long time to choose between them. But if you have a smaller translation memory, you might want to keep it at 75 or even lower percentage if you're not working with sub-segment chunks. So adjusting that sensitivity, it's important as to do as you go and as you build your new translation memory. Now, to finish this video, let's talk very briefly about some of the negative impacts of using a translation memory and how you can prevent them from impacting your work negatively. One thing that people always mention about a consequence of using translation memory, and a hard part of it, is that when the sentences or the segments are committed to a translation memory in the form of a translation unit, you lose completely the connection with the text. So we'll never know again where that sentence comes from. So it's not possible to, for instance, click and see the whole paragraph to get a better grasp of the context. So that's something that we know that language is not made of loose sentences, loosely organized. They have a sequence. They have connections to each other. So that's one bad thing that some authors even say, that a TM is actually a memory of sentences out of context. So we always have to pay attention to that. And there is a way to prevent that from happening. The other negative impact that translation memory can have on your work is that, of course, languages do not have a one-for-one correspondent. Even two texts that are considered equivalent, if you look at the sentences, they are not necessarily equivalent, and they may not be equivalent in 1 year, 10 years from now. So there are all these different stylistic requirements that we have to look into. And we have to always remember that individual sentences are not necessarily equivalent if you take them out of the context. Another thing is that some translators think that translation memory can kind of play down on their creativity for finding synonyms, for instance. Once you're presented with an option, it's hard to think about other possibilities because you are convinced that that's the best option. Whereas if you were looking for different alternatives, you might come up with something different. So it's a way of pasteurizing language in a sense. So solutions to help us cope with that. The most important one is to add an ID for your source text in the translation memory, so we know every time that TM segment is recovered, I can go and look and see, oh, this comes from this book or this comes from this article. I can go to that text and see the whole text if I want. And some people find it useful to make the segments bigger than a sentence, make them paragraphs, for instance, because then, of course, you're going to retrieve much less correspondence, but they're going to be much more similar to your context of use. Try not to mix too many different authors and subjects and clients in one big translation memory, because then you're going to be mixing several different situations of communication. So here are some of the references that I've used in this work, and I hope you enjoyed the information that I've shared here with you. I hope this content was useful to you. Please help us spread the word, and if you want to learn more about translation and technology, check the other videos in the series. Obrigada!